On this Tuesday night from Edmonton, the Pope's faithful pack a football stadium. Holy Mass delivered to tens of thousands.
That's once in a lifetime.
And the critical step forward on the journey to truth and reconciliation.
The one sort of golden discovery that I made was
syntax of a different sort.
It is a kind of revenge.
Iqaluit's new bylaw for churches after the revealing of unmarked graves. One athlete's childhood dream turns into a nightmare.
I became suicidal.
The multiplying calls to overhaul hockey's toxic culture. And a top officer grilled new revelations at the Nova Scotia massacre inquiry.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight from Edmonton, Neetu Garcha.
We are in Fort Edmonton tonight at the Indigenous Peoples Experience, an immersive cultural exhibition that's seen a delegation of Catholic bishops as well as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visit over the past few days. Good evening and thanks for joining us. All eyes today were focused minutes from here as Pope Francis hosted the largest event of his Canadian tour.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Peace be with you.
And with your spirit.
The Pope welcomed more than 50,000 people to Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium for a public open-air mass. It was less than expected, but it was still a crowd big enough to nearly fill Canada's largest stadium. Today's Mass garnered global attention with parishioners traveling from around the world to see the Pope speak. But it's in the community of Lac Ste, northwest of Edmonton, where many Indigenous people saw the head of the Catholic Church participate in a pilgrimage at the site believed to have healing powers. That's where we find our Heather Yourex-West tonight. Heather, tell us what's happening.
Neetu, the Pope is still speaking to the crowd of about 2,000 people that have gathered here. He is leading a prayer service as we speak, telling the crowd that their presence here shows their resilience and that their ability to heal. So as the crowd here continues to listen to his words, I know that many are hoping to hear words of apology from the Pope, as they heard yesterday. The Pope is spending about an hour in total here in Lac Ste, a deeply spiritual place for Indigenous people and Indigenous Catholics and Catholics that are non-Indigenous as well. People have been making a pilgrimage to this community, to a lake that the Alexis Nakota people call God's Lake, ever since a Nakota chief many generations ago followed a vision and brought his people up to settle around these waters. The waters, as you mentioned, are believed to have healing powers, and after he arrived, the Pope in a wheelchair made his way down the newly paved pathway that was paved just for his visit, down to the water where he blessed a small amount of the water. Thousands of people, as I said, gathered to see the Pope here, just as thousands gathered to see him earlier today at Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton.
At Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium, Pope Francis arrives to cheers. Some in the crowd waiting since sunrise to get in, all anxious to get a glimpse of the Holy Father, hoping to take a picture or have their young children blessed with a kiss.
It's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm Catholic, been Catholic my whole life, and it's something that's very important to me.
I'm thrilled. I feel blessed that I was able to be this close to him, and he acknowledged me by waving.
But the open-air Mass was planned with reconciliation in mind. The liturgy designed by Father Christina Bouvette, who is Cree Métis.
My paternal grandmother spent 12 years of her life, her entire education, in the Indian residential school system.
Brothers and sisters, let us acknowledge our sins.
Pope Francis appearing solemn and sincere, praying for First Nations, Inuit and Métis people.
A future in which the history of violence and marginalization suffered by our Indigenous brothers and sisters is never repeated.
A powerful message with many residential school survivors and their families in the crowd, while others gathered west of the city in the community of Lac Ste. Roy Necroche attended the Beauval Residential School in northern Saskatchewan for 8 years as a young boy. He says he's been waiting decades to hear the words of apology in person from the Pope.
I would say ever since we went to school, ever since then, I guess you could say. I wanted to have my parents with me when I went to school. I never had that. If I had problems, I would have went to my parents and talked to them, but I couldn't. That privilege was taken away from me.
Like so many others, Necroche is hoping to heal and hoping an encounter with Pope Francis will help him find forgiveness and freedom so he may finally move on.
So Neetu, the Pope is still speaking with the crowd that has gathered here. This is, of course, his last stop in the Edmonton leg of his Canadian tour. Tomorrow, he will leave Edmonton and continue on to his two other stops in Iqaluit and Quebec City. Back to you.
And we will have extensive coverage of both. Heather Yourex-West in Lac Ste, Alberta. Thanks, Heather. The release of residential school records has been a persistent yet unsuccessful request from Indigenous communities in the lead up to this trip. Tonight, though, news of a major revelation from the first Canadian researcher ever to access a trove of records in Rome. Hundreds of original images of children in residential schools across Canada that few have ever seen. And while more is still needed, many believe this unprecedented access is a big step forward in the pursuit for truth and justice. Raymond Frogner has made what he calls a golden discovery, one that could make it much easier to identify children who died in Canada's residential schools.
These are original photographs that I don't think communities have ever seen. I saw photographs from some of the more prominent schools that have been in the news lately: the Kawases, the Kamloops, Penelakut, the Six Nations of the Grand River.
Frogner found the images earlier this month when he was granted exclusive access to the Oblate General Archives in Rome, a vast collection of records separate from the Vatican archives, containing everything from personal files of priests and residential school staff to individual pictures.
About 1,000 photographs, black and white, with handwritten descriptions on the back. And these photos were sent by various priests from different schools and locations in Canada back to Rome.
He also took with him a list of priests charged with crimes committed against children in residential schools.
I was kept under watch as I was going through the archival records, but I was able to request any files and they were retrieved for me.
The next step is to digitize the photographs and records so copies exist in Canada and are available to families.
This is a phenomenal step forward.
The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation is also examining records of other institutions like missions and industrial schools. Day school survivors like incoming University of Ottawa Chancellor Claudette Commanda say exposing the truth can bring closure to communities.
The discovery of these documents that have never been seen before, except by the Vatican, well, that is one step, one big major step. And that is very critical in bringing healing and justice and disclosure to the survivors and their families.
As for some of the records in Canada, Calgary Bishop William McGrattan told Global News in May they'll be digitized and accessible within 3 years.
If their loved ones did attend a residential school and were buried in a cemetery that was adjacent to a parish or a mission, we would have those sacramental records, and we're trying to make those available.
But Musquechee's resident Lucy Johnson says it's important to acknowledge how long it's taken to get here.
They should have been released 20 years ago. Why keep them hidden in Rome for decades?
Quite honestly, I think if it was not for the discovery of the unmarked gravesites from 2021, I don't think I would have been able to make that trip to Rome. And quite frankly, I don't think we'd have seen the apology from the Pope.
He says a total of nearly 4 million documents and 7,000 witness statements have been archived so far, and communities looking to access them can make their requests directly through the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Later in the newscast, rethinking the role of the church, a closer look at a polarizing tax on churches in Canada's northernmost city. And a reminder that if you or someone you know who is a residential school survivor are looking for help, you can call the Residential School Survivors and Family Crisis Line anytime. The number is 1-800-721-0066. Turning now to other news, Canada's sports minister spoke to a House of Commons committee today about the ongoing investigation into Hockey Canada and its handling of sexual assault allegations. As Shallima Maharaj reports, issues of not addressing abuse have been plaguing hockey culture for decades.
I did see a lot of things that now, as a 35-year-old father, I look at and I'm like, wow, that that really was not right.
Brady Leavold was 16 years old when he left home to play in the Western Hockey League, chasing an NHL dream that would become a nightmare.
Back in those days, hazing and bullying was really prevalent. And I was one of the guys on the team that got it really bad. And it got to the point where I became suicidal, and I wasn't running to my coaches or anybody to tell them, because that was just going to make it worse, right?
Insight into problematic parts of established hockey culture in this country now under increasing scrutiny.
You're made to feel almost like you are more special than other people. And it's hard to navigate that as a young man at 16, 17, 18. You have all these people who are telling you how great you are and how much they love you. It's hard to keep that ego in check.
Hockey Canada is under fire after revelations it used a special fund to settle sexual assault claims. And 2 criminal investigations involving men's junior teams are now reopened. Officials will testify before a parliamentary committee Wednesday.
So you didn't consider it a significant risk that an organization was under a cloud of sexual assault allegations? You didn't consider that was a sufficient risk to flag this at each time these funding decisions were being made?
At the time, we were waiting for the results of the investigation.
The people that were present in the past decade and in the past years and in the events of 2018 and how they managed the whole situations, are they really the right leaders to implement the change that hockey culture needs?
Former NHLer Sheldon Kennedy, a victim of sexual abuse in youth hockey, issued a statement calling for the resignation of Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith, the organization's leadership team and its board of directors Tuesday, saying the same people with a new plan expecting different results is the definition of insanity. Neetu?
Thanks, Shallima. Fresh revelations spawning questions at the Nova Scotia massacre inquiry. Coming up, what a top RCMP officer said on the stand. We are at the Indigenous people's experience on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River on Treaty 6 territory. This land is a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Nakota, Blackfoot, and Métis people. We'll be right back. British Columbians are sweltering under another dangerous heat wave, blanketing most of the province with warnings from Environment Canada. The Metro Vancouver area faces highs around 35 degrees, while parts of BC's interior, including the city of Kamloops and the village of Lytton, are expected to endure temperatures up to 40 degrees throughout the week. The scorching conditions may not start cooling down until this weekend at the earliest. The RCMP officer in charge of the investigation into Nova Scotia's worst mass shooting that left 22 people dead revealed why he was concerned about political interference surrounding the probe. Yesterday, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki denied any meddling in the case. But today, Chief Superintendent Darren Campbell said he stands by his notes taken during a conference call with Lucki 2 years ago. Ross Lord reports.
I'm truly sorry that we failed you. I promise that we'll do better.
RCMP Superintendent Darren Campbell broke down, addressing the families of victims before the Mass Casualty Commission's public inquiry. A rare moment of raw emotion, recalling a day that changed countless families forever. Earlier, Campbell spoke of why he didn't want his national boss, Brenda Lucki, pressuring him to reveal details about the killer's weapons.
I was very concerned that if it was political, if it was politically motivated, how the families would perceive that. That bothered me.
Commissioner Lucki and Federal Cabinet Minister Bill Blair both deny allegations of political interference. But Campbell's testimony featured other revelations, some leading a lawyer for victims' families to wonder how many recommendations from previous tragedies involving RCMP members have been implemented.
Are you able to say, Chief Superintendent Campbell, if that TAC, Threat Assessment Coordinator, was in place in Nova Scotia?
I'm not in a position to say that.
Campbell also admits to being part of the decision to charge the killer's longtime partner, Lisa Banfield, with supplying him with ammunition. Police admit Banfield had no idea he would go on a murder spree, and evidence showed she was a longtime abuse victim living in fear.
And did the optics include that it might be perceived as an attempt to divert attention from the responsibility of the RCMP for what had happened on the night of the murders?
No, that actually never crossed my mind.
Banfield's charges were eventually moved from the courts to restorative justice. She's been discharged with no criminal record. Ross Lord, Global News.
The campaign to free Brittany Griner ahead, the legal battle to prove Russia wrongfully detained the American basketball star. Global National is back from Edmonton after this. Welcome back to Edmonton. Now to Washington, where former U.S. President Donald Trump returned for the first time since leaving office.
We've become a beggar nation, groveling to other countries for energy. Millions of illegal aliens are stampeding across our wide open borders, pouring into our country. It's an invasion. Democrat-run cities are setting all-time murder.
Trump is being advised to speak more about his vision for the future and less about the 2020 election that he claims was stolen by Joe Biden. Today, Trump made his case for a possible second term ahead of the November midterm election, saying America is facing an energy crunch fueled by Democrat policies. European Union member states agreed on a plan to reduce natural gas consumption as Russia cuts supply and the war in Ukraine shows no end in sight. The bloc agreed to temporarily lower demand for natural gas by 15%, but says the move may become mandatory if Russia turns off the taps completely and storage levels drop dramatically. The deal was reached a day after Russian energy giant Gazprom announced it was cutting daily gas deliveries to Germany in half, from 40% down to 20%. American basketball star Brittany Griner appeared in a Russian court today, her fifth hearing after being arrested in February over cannabis oil found in her luggage. Her defense team focused on testimony from a narcology expert, saying that while illegal in Russia, cannabis is used medicinally in other countries. U.S. officials and prominent athletes have argued she's been wrongfully detained. Griner faces up to 10 years in prison if convicted. The price of penance next. Why Iqaluit's churches will soon pay a very real cost for the atrocities of the past. We're back in a moment from Edmonton. Some enthralling performances earlier today from outside the Indigenous Peoples Experience exhibit in Fort Edmonton Park. That's where we've been broadcasting to you as we cover the second full day of Pope Francis's trip in Canada to seek forgiveness from Indigenous communities. The final stop of the Pope's Canadian tour will be Iqaluit on Friday, where he'll briefly meet with Nunavut's residential school survivors. Following the revealing of unmarked graves at former school sites, the city of Iqaluit unanimously passed a bylaw to require churches to pay taxes. As Jeff Semple reports from Iqaluit, some are now rethinking the church's role.
Sunday morning Mass in Iqaluit.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
In the remote northern city's only Catholic church, parishioners are preparing for a special visitor.
I told my mom, the Pope is coming to Iqaluit. Do you want to come to Iqaluit? Oh my God, that's my dream to go see the Pope. Yes, I will come.
On Friday, Pope Francis will make a brief stop in Nunavut's capital. And these Catholics will form part of his official welcoming party.
It feels great. Feels great.
At a ceremony, Rhoda Ungmala will recite the Lord's Prayer in Inuktitut.
Give me a preview of that. First one line or two.
Ungmala first met the Pope back in March, part of the delegation of Indigenous leaders invited to the Vatican. She delivered a gift, this sealskin pouch, and a message.
I told him to apologize from the heart. It's long time coming, and he needs to do that.
The Pope is expected to apologize in person to Nunavut's residential school survivors. Around 60% of Iqaluit's population is Indigenous, and many were forced to attend Catholic-run schools where abuse was rampant. Peter Ernuk was 11 when he was assaulted by a nun for not speaking English.
Residential school was a horrible living. It's a horror story about how we were taken away forcibly from our parents.
The Pope's apology is largely symbolic, of course, but local churches here in Iqaluit may soon be forced to pay a very real price. As a result of a bylaw passed here in April, starting next year, churches will no longer be automatically exempt from property taxes. The bylaw passed unanimously in the wake of the discovery of unmarked graves. Churches, along with other community groups, must now apply for tax relief. The funding is capped with strict conditions.
It is unfair. It is a kind of revenge or a kind of game.
The local Catholic priest says the tax may limit their ability to offer services, from weddings and funerals to hospital and prison visits, for free.
For some churches, they can bankrupt with that tax.
Everyone is lacking in resources.
The local MP defends the bylaw, noting the city is struggling to pay for basic services.
It's not fair to the rest of the municipality to have to carry the burden of a faith-based group that itself is part of the history of colonialism.
The new tax has proved polarizing here. The per capita impact of residential schools was highest in the north. But despite their traumatic history with the church, 3/4 of Iqaluit's population still identifies as Christian. Most are Anglican.
In the early days, our parents were very much going to church and following, the teachings of the Bible.
Abraham Teralik is a residential school survivor, a former radio host, and co-founder of the Aboriginal People's Television Network. He believes the sun is setting on the church's prominence.
They've kind of lost the control they used to have. The young people today, they don't go to church, they don't read the Bible, they're not really religious in any way anymore. I think it was kind of forced on us at that stage, and it was all part of converting us.
The discovery of unmarked graves and a papal apology are prompting a rethink over the traditional role and rights of the church in Canada, including in its northernmost city. Jeff Semple, Global News, Iqaluit.
And Jeff will bring you Global National from Quebec City tomorrow. That's it for us tonight. I'm Neetu Garcha. We'll leave you more scenes from today's service at Commonwealth Stadium. Thanks for watching. Good night.